In this chapter, what we're going to do is go over Chapter 14, the whole idea of retirement and estate planning and some of the things that's necessary to be thinking about. Now, it's important to start early as far as retirement is concerned and thinking about it. There are a lot of myths. You have plenty of time to start saving, okay? Saving just a little bit isn't going to help. Don't worry about it. You're going to spend less money when you retire. You can see some of the myths that go along with it. One of the big ones is right here. You can depend on Social Security. Not necessarily. So these are some of the myths that come along with retirement and the need to start early. Some of the things to really think about. Start now. Time is critical because even small deposits into a retirement account can yield a lot of benefit down the road. One of the things to think about is using an automatic deduction from your payroll. That way you really don't see it. If it automatically comes out of your paycheck, it goes into a retirement account, you're not even seeing it. And that's a great way to start saving. You need to save regularly and don't touch it unless you absolutely have to. Now, you want to be a millionaire when you retire? Starting at age 25, if you can put aside $127 a month, now this is looking at an 11% annual percentage rate yield, okay, for 40 years. In order to get an 11%, you're probably looking more at the markets, the stock markets and things like that. But if you can put away $127 a month at 11% for the 40 years, starting at age 25, at age 65, you'll be a millionaire. If you wait until you're 50, you're going to have to put aside $2,200 a month in order to reach that millionaire status. So the key is to start early as far as your investments and the things that are necessary to do to save. Now, one of the things you want to do is think about a financial analysis and really think about what it is that you're doing, because chances are the biggest asset you're going to have is your house. And if you do have a lot of equity in your house, in other words, let's say that your house is completely paid off and things like that, you might be able to get a reverse mortgage. In other words, you're basically taking out a loan a little bit at a time, and they're sending you money each month. One of the things to think about is your life insurance, okay? Once you retire, you're really not going to need as much life insurance because the kids are gone and things like that. Now, one of the things to think about is the living expenses that you're going to have when you do retire. For example, you're not going to have the expenses as far as putting aside money to a 401k or to a retirement account. All right? You're going to be working less. You're not going to be spending as much for gas or clothing, things like that. A lot of times when people retire, their house is already paid off. And your federal income taxes are going to be lower because you're not earning as much. The thing is, there are going to be some expenses that go up. Your medical expenses are going to go up. Leisure time. In other words, you might decide, hey, we want to do more travel, things like that. So there are going to be some expenses that actually go up. Now, there's 4 sources as far as your retirement income. You could have a pension plan, in other words, from your employer or from the government. Maybe you have personal retirement plans, or maybe you've bought some annuities. Now, a pension is a plan that you'd get some funding from your employer and some from yourself. Now, that's an employer benefit plan, pension plan. What happens is they're putting in some money into your retirement account, and you're putting in some money into your retirement account, and that is tax deferred. In other words, you're not paying any taxes on that until you start to withdraw it. So a lot of times what people have is like a 401k or a PKEO or something along those lines. In other words, a defined contribution. In other words, you put money in and it's getting returns and interest and things like that. And when you retire, you start drawing from that account. Now, a 401k is basically where the employer is putting in some contributions and you're putting in some contributions. And that is tax deferred. In other words, you're not having to pay tax on that. When you start taking it out, you will have to pay income tax on it. And so the thing is, with these defined benefit plans, you will typically be given a few options as far as, okay, I'd like to have my money go into something that's safe, or I'd like to have my money go into something that's more of a growth type of account. And so you'll have some options as far as how that money is actually going to be invested, but the company is going to determine where it specifically goes. One of the things to think about is if you leave a company and you have a retirement plan, you can take that retirement plan and put it into your new company's retirement plan. So there is the portability as far as some of those things. Or if the company that you're going to does not have a retirement plan like that, you can set up a self-directed IRA, individual retirement account. Social Security. A majority of people do rely on Social Security as far as a portion of their income. Now the thing is, Social Security was never meant to be all of your retirement income. It needs to be an addition to whatever it is that you have. Once a year, around your birthday, you'll get an earnings and benefits statement from the Social Security Administration saying, here is what your payout will be based on your current and past income and when you retire at various ages. Now, full retirement age is 70. It's not going to get any bigger as far as what it is that you could pull from Social Security at age 70. You can take early retirement and get some benefits starting at 62. However, I think it's like something like 75 to 80% of the full. My full retirement age is 66, okay? Now I can decide not to take it at 66. The thing is, at 70, it's not going to get any bigger. In other words, I get 100% starting at 66. I get a few percentages more if I wait another year or two before I start taking it. The government will also provide some retirement plans for federal government workers and things like that, okay? You have regular IRAs, all right? You can set up an IRA right now, an individual retirement account. And what it does is allows you to put $5,500 into that account each year, all right? That contribution, that amount that you put in there is tax deductible. In other words, for your current year's taxes, you subtract out whatever it is that you contributed to your IRA, and that reduces your taxable income. However, once you start withdrawing from it at age 59 or greater, you have to pay income tax on that because that money has not been taxed. There are other accounts like a Roth IRA where you put money in and you're taxed, okay, on that. It is not tax deductible. The thing is, when you start pulling the money out, you don't have to pay tax on it because you've already paid tax on those funds. There's also SEPs, Simplified Employee Pensions, spousal IRAs, rollover, education, things like that. There's various types of retirement accounts, Keogh plans, this sort of thing. You don't need to know the specifics on all of these. Just understand that these are the different types of plans that are out there. And this shows some of the different features that goes along with each of those. Now, annuities is another form of income at retirement. In other words, you might buy an annuity which might have some life insurance and then also some savings. And you're paying on that policy until maybe 65. It has built up a cash value. And at age 65, you can start withdrawing from that to provide you some income along with your Social Security. One of the things to think about is, okay, so how am I going to live on my retirement income? If you're not having enough money as far as your income is concerned, you have to start thinking about, okay, what can we do? Convert assets into cash. Maybe what you do is you downsize as far as your house is concerned. Maybe you go from 2 cars to 1 or something along those lines. And there are a lot of folks who are working during retirement. Sometimes in order to make up some of the income, other times it's, I want something to do. Another thing to think about is estate planning. An estate is everything that you own. All right, so in other words, you look around yourself, there's your house, there's your car, there's all of your furniture and your dishes and things like that. That is your estate. And one of the things to think about is, how is my estate going to be disposed of at my death? When you start thinking about the estate, you have to think about the planning. Okay, so you've built up all of your savings and your retirement account and this sort of thing. You need to make sure that somebody knows, okay, here's how it's supposed to be handled when I leave this earth, when I pass away. One of the primary things to think about is having a will. All right. Other documents, and this goes right back to the very first chapter that we talked about. What are the various documents that you need to keep? And here we are, all the way around again. Your marriage or birth documents, your any kind of legal name changes, insurance policies, safe deposit box records. Make sure you have all of these documents pulled together. And then what you do is you put together a will. The best thing to do is to meet with a lawyer so that you can put together what that will is going to be. Because if you die intestate, in other words, you do not have a will, what happens is a judge is going to decide who gets what out of your estate. And it may not be some of the things that you wanted to happen. So there's different kinds of wills. A simple will where you leave everything to your spouse, okay? Traditional marital share, exemption trust, stated will amount, things like this. One of the things to think about is what's called probate. Once you pass away and all this stuff needs to be taken care of, it will go to probate. If you have your will already set up and everybody knows what it is that's supposed to happen, and you have an executor who knows what's supposed to happen, the probate judge will just basically rubber stamp it and you let it go. If you die intestate without a will, when it goes to probate, it could take quite a bit of time as far as making sure who gets what of your stuff. There's different types of wills. A holographic will is one that you sit down on a piece of paper and write it out and say, this is my last will and testament and things like that. Sometimes states will not recognize those. Formal wills, that's what I suggest that most people do, is get themselves a formal will. It might cost you a couple of $100 as far as an attorney is concerned. The thing is, it will be a valid will. An executor is somebody who is going to execute that will and take care of your estate. And so one of the things they'll do is put together an inventory of all the stuff you have. They'll pay off your debts. They'll file all the income taxes and things like that. In other words, they're making sure that they take care of everything that's going on. For example, my uncle died last year, and his son, my cousin, is the executor for his estate. And so right now, he's working on disposing of 2 houses, a lot of artwork that was actually part of my family's goes back in my family, and various things like that. So he's in the process of executing all that, and it's taking some time to get everything cleaned up and make sure that everything is taken care of correctly. If you have kids, one of the things you want to do in your will is make sure you select a guardian. In other words, if you and your spouse or significant other pass away, what's going to happen with your kids? Who's going to take care of them? When my wife and I put together our wills, we had little ones at home, and we had a guardian who was identified, which was her sister, who is actually an attorney. If you need to review your will and alter it, you need to make sure that it's done correctly. In other words, go to a lawyer and have a codicil added to it. Do not make any kind of writing or changes or something like that on the official document. It may not be recognized. So make sure you go through the legal aspect and get somebody to make the changes that are necessary for your will. Now, another thing to think about, and you may have heard of, is what's called a living will. In other words, here you are, maybe you have become incapacitated. You have been in an accident, you're in a coma, okay? And you're about to pass away. You can have what's called a DNR, do not resuscitate. In other words, if the only way they can keep you alive is through machines, and if you have that DNR, that living will, it says, no, don't do that. Don't keep me alive just with machines like that. Go ahead and let me go. That's what the living will do. Another thing to think about is what's going to happen with all your social media. In other words, your Twitter account, your Facebook account, all of the various social media accounts that you have. You need to make sure that people have access to that and know what to do in case something does happen to you. Another thing to think about is what's called a power of attorney. In other words, let's say you're in an accident, you're in a coma, somebody needs to make some decisions for you. As long as you have a power of attorney, then they can make those decisions. Otherwise, it may be up in the air, it might go to the courts, things like that. A lot of people will put together what's called a letter of last instruction. In other words, okay, here's my will over there. Now here's a letter that says, okay, in case of my death, all right, I want my funeral arrangements to be here. I want this to happen, that to happen, this sort of thing. It doesn't have to be binding. All right. In other words, whoever has that, the executor might say, you know what, those funeral preferences are not going to work. We're going to have to do something different. Another thing to think about is trusts. In other words, you can have your estate put aside into a trust. A trust is typically handled by a bank, where what they're doing is they're keeping track of your assets, the money that you have, and things like that. And you may decide in your trust to have a certain amount allocated every month to a child or something along those lines. They will make sure that that kind of stuff is taken care of. They manage all of the assets, and they free you up from having to do any of that. There's different kinds of trusts, okay? There's revocable and irrevocable, okay? In other words, revocable, you can make changes to it. An irrevocable trust means that you can't make any changes to it. Different taxes are involved, different probate issues, things like that. And there's other things. You have a credit shelter trust, okay? Just be familiar with some of those, a disclaimer trust, things like this. One of the things that happens when you pass away is what's called estate taxes or death taxes. Kansas does not have an estate tax anymore. There is a federal tax. The thing is, if you as an individual have about $11.2 million in your estate, anything over that can be taxed. In other words, let's say that you have $15 million as far as your estate is concerned. They can tax, the federal government will charge the estate a tax on the difference between the $15 million and the $11 million. Now, inheritance taxes. Kansas does not have an inheritance tax. There is a federal tax. However, the exemption on that is, I forget what it is. But anyway, that you receive an inheritance, all right, basically as a gift. There is a $15,000 limit as far as what is not taxed. Over $15,000, you can be taxed at a particular rate. Kansas does not have gift tax or inheritance taxes. So you have a living trust, you have a testamentary trust, and things like this. These are some of the key points from the chapter. If you have questions, please give me a shout.